So after this one, you can also see this club foot because they can show you a picture with a baby that presented in a family medicine practice, or you are working as a family medicine, and now this is the presentation of the baby and the or whatever they will explain that this is how it looks like. So you need to know that this is a club foot. Usually in this case, they don't ask for the diagnosis, but they do like to ask about the treatment. So it's a congenital foot deformity, musculature. So bony deformation could be there as well. So in this cases, mostly it's idiopathic, and could be neurogenic and other symptoms too. So what is the physical examination? Examination for the calf deformity. Examine hips for DDH as well. So you have to make sure when you are looking for club foot, you have to look for the hips as well. You have to look for the knees as well, just to make sure that it's just limited to foot, not into the knee and then the hip. So they can give you a question where the patient has a club foot, what other factors you would like to see. It's just like how they can give you a question about Down syndrome and ask you what are the associated conditions can be there. So ADHD, autism, so those are all the things. Diagnosis is often from the pelvic examination. Usually we don't go for radiograph. And then how are you going to do the treatment? Basically the word, this one, Ponseti technique. So correct the deformity. So you have to do the cast for 1 to 2 weeks, typically percutaneous Achilles tendon, and then another 3 weeks you have to continue with the of the casting, then surgical release in the refractory cases if it comes back again and again. Delayed until 3 to 4 months. So when are you going to do the treatment? That's important. 3 to 4 months, and 3-year recurrence could be there. Then this scoliosis, it's not that crazy important, but you can just give it a quick read because there is a lot of cases in family medicine practice where there is patient with a back pain and the diagnosis is only scoliosis. And it's basically in the age of 10 to 14. So what are the main causes? It's mainly the idiopathic. What are the tests? Adams test is the one that's supposed to be done. So it could be associated with the posterior midline skin lesions in the neuromuscular scoliosis. Doing an X-ray, then coming to the treatment. What are the treatment based on the Cobb angle? In this bone tumors, the osteosarcoma is important. And then mainly the pictures. How does the X-ray look like? Okay. So usually they can give you a picture where the Codman's triangle is and asking you it's a bone tumor or is it a malignant or not. If you don't know how does it look like on the X-ray, you will not be able to make the diagnosis. How does the onion skin look like or the sunburst? The picture of the X-ray is very clear, okay, in this one mainly. Why? Just because you can able to figure out which one is the tumor based on the X-ray. So if you go for bullseye, so you can find this is an osteoid osteoma. Then there is one more, osteochondroma, which radiograph finding is there. It's basically the mushroom on X-ray. Then come the osteoblastoma. In this one, there is giant cell tumor or there is an aneurysmal bone tumor. So you can see how does they look like. Mainly the radiograph. How does the picture look like and how you're going to make the diagnosis by looking on those pictures. Okay. Then basically the osteosarcoma, mainly we are looking for Cod's triangle and you need to see how does it look like. As you can see from the sidebar too, how does it look like? So mainly there are some X-rays given on the Toronto note, some of them are you have to see from Google. Then Ewing sarcoma, it's like a skin appearance, mainly like a onion skin. Uh, then there is a moth eaten. So mainly the X-ray, if you can see, because after the X-ray or the diagnosis, it's the oncologist that follow up. So you need to know only the diagnosis part. Multiple myeloma is one of the most favorite topic from NACOSKI point of view. So it's best if you can give it a read from here because the presentation could be anything, back pain or a fever or something like that. So usually you need to see the diagnosis. The diagnosis is basically doing a serum urine electrophoresis, not an X-ray, and then doing a CT guided biopsy of that one. Treatment is basically chemotherapy, so just give it a read. So that's about it. Now we're going to start the neurology part. Then we will go back to emergency medicine. So here is some quick review points. I don't know how long ago it was made. So it will just give you a quick read about what are the important things and what you have to do from neurology. I will share this one, this PDF. So let's start with this one in the neurology. So this is just some few points that I feel like that was important from there, and then you can just quickly read it again when you are doing a revision. So unilateral sware periorbital headache with the tearing and conjunctival erythema. It's mainly the cluster headache. So conjunctiva is basically the red, so leading towards the cluster headache. It can give you a little bit of idea. What is the treatment is sumatriptan. Make sure, because this was made a little bit older time, like maybe 2-3 years ago. So just make sure whatever the drug of choice is written here, it's just confirm it with your Toronto notes as well. Because in the recent Toronto notes 2024, they might change a little bit here and there. So just to see that. Highly effective and combined with 100% oxygen. Another treatment is dihydroxyergotamine, octreotide, or lidocaine. That's very last one. Prophylaxis is given verapamil, which is basically calcium channel blocker, is the first line. Alternative treatment is lithium, valproic acid, or topiramate. As you can see, what are the type of headaches? Very, very important. What are the sinus one? Where the main exactly the location of the pain is. Cluster, it's mainly the eye and then behind the eye. Tension is mainly the forehead. Migraine is only on the one side. So the treatment of migraine, acute attack, we usually go for NSAIDs like naproxen, aspirin, whatever it is. Then triptans. Triptans is also used for prophylaxis as well. And ergots are highly effective in the aborting migraine attacks. So the doses are also written so you can just see from here. Then prophylaxis of migraine is avoid the main triggers. Usually it was made at that time when the CDM was there. So these were just the lines so you can quickly just read it. Avoid the known triggers if headaches occur more than 2 to 3 times per month, affect more work or quality of life. Daily use of beta blockers, TCAs, calcium blockers, valproic acid, and then cyproheptadine. Then beta blockers can be given. So usually in daily practice, beta blocker is the number one that is being used for a prolonged period of time. Most common pituitary tumor is prolactinoma. Treatment is basically giving bromocriptine. So headache can present along with having breast or nipple milk discharge or something like regarding to that one and can lead towards the prolactinoma. Okay. So you can see a little bit picture from here. Then a patient, 55-year-old patient presents with acute broken breech. So type of aphasia comes from the Broca aphasia. It's very less likely they do ask about this one. Usually they can ask you like in a stroke point of view, like he was having TIA or stroke. So, they can give you like a Broca's aphasia or type of like where the patient was having struggling with the speech. So now you have to know which artery or leading towards the stroke. So they can give you a MCQs like a stroke related to left middle cerebral artery or something like that. So just knowing stroke might not be enough in some of the MCQs. So that's why it's just written here. Lobe endovascular dysfunction is coming from the frontal lobe, and the left is middle cerebral artery is basically the distribution. Most common cause of subarachnoid hemorrhage is the trauma. Second most common is the aneurysm. Which one? The Berry aneurysm. So you can see how does it look like. The crescent shape hyperdensity on the CT that does not cross the midline, and then the subdural hematoma bridging veins that's been torn out. So knowing the difference, as I told you, how does the X-ray look like? You can see the difference from here. So epidural, subdural. Epidural is basically the skull and the other endosteal layer of the dura, and then basically subdural is basically below the dura. So involved vessels, you can just read those ones. Symptoms is basically lucid and then gradually increase headache and confusion. CT scan is the one with the epidural is the biconvex, and then subdural is the crescent shape one. So you can see how does it look like. They can give you a CT scan and asking you what is the diagnosis. Most significant for the initially altered mental status with an intervening lucid intervals is basically epidural hematoma. So its MCQs can come just exactly like that. Most likely the source is coming from the middle meningeal artery. So they can ask about epidural hematoma with or associated with the middle meningeal artery. Treatment is neurosurgical evaluation anyway. CSF finding with the subarachnoid hemorrhage. The ICP will be high. There is RBCs, xanthochromia. Xanthochromia is basically having the yellow discoloration because of the bilirubin, because the RBCs is breaking down. Then albuminocytologic dissociation. What are those ones? The Guillain-Barré. So usually it comes after some sort of diarrhea or some sort of infection. So just for your knowledge. It may be associated with the Campylobacter infection. As I told you, in the diarrhea part, it's very important. So they can give you a diarrhea case where they can ask you what is the complication. Okay. It often follows a vaccine or the viral infection as well. Essential of the diagnosis is basically a recent viral infection, diarrhea, followed by ascending paralysis, gait disturbance, symptoms of the cranial nerves, or the respiratory depression. Physical examination, what are you going to find? Limb weakness, areflexia, all of this one. And what are the lab diagnoses? Lab diagnosis is going for CSF, increase the protein with the little pleocytosis, like protein cell disposition, then EMG, and then along with that neurological conduct test we will do to show the diffuse demyelination. Then the treatment, the most common treatment is basically giving IV administration of the plasmapheresis. It's important. Why? Because they can ask you in MCQs for your knowledge. What is the treatment for the Guillain-Barré? So it's basically the IV plasmapheresis or immunoglobulin. Note that the steroids are not helpful and IVIG is contraindicated with the IgA deficiency. Then the cold water is flushed into the patient's ear and the fast pace of the nystagmus is associated is towards the opposite side, normal or the pathological. It's normal. I mean, these are 4 or 5 people that actually write down these notes when they were making it. So just, there are important lines from somewhere, so they just put it together. Most common first degree source of metastasis to the brain that comes from lung, breast, skin, kidney, and GI tract. It's important. Maybe because I think it's in the last time's MCC practice test, may be seen in the children who are accused of inattention in the class and are often confused with the ADHD. So ADHD stands for the attention deficit. So don't mix the inattention with that one. So a person with the ADHD has a difference in the brain development, brain activity, inability to sit for too long, does not wait for their turn, self-control is missing. So that's why inattention cannot be ADHD. So you need to know which is ADHD. Can affect a child at school, home, and so there are more than 2 settings or more than 1 setting. Like not just in school, he might have a problem in the home as well. So treatment of absence here is ethoxyzumide. Most common presentation of intracranial neoplasm is headache. Neoplasm are less common than the brain metastasis. Most common cause of the seizure in the children is basically 2 to 10 is infection. Usually the infection is one of the most common source, and we try to rule out it's a meningitis or anything like that. And then very febrile seizures is very common, then trauma, and then idiopathic. Most common cause of the seizure in the young is basically trauma after 18 to 35, alcohol withdrawal, and the brain tumor. First line treatment of the status epilepticus is basically benzodiazepine, although it's very short time. Confusion this is very important because they can give you a patient who's homeless and now coming with the confusion along with some sort of eye problem where the diagnosis is ophthalmoplegia. So what are they looking for? Wernicke. Now you need to know what is Wernicke-Korsakoff encephalopathy or what is Wernicke encephalopathy. So you need to know both of them. So Wernicke encephalopathy is confusion, ophthalmoplegia, and ataxia. It is mainly by the confusion of B1 and is acute neurological condition, which is actually a triad of these 3 things. This is a life-threatening illness and caused by thiamine deficiency, which primarily affects the peripheral and the neural system. So as you can see, this is Wernicke, the encephalopathy, where the disorientation, indifference, and then inattentiveness. And then ocular is basically nystagmus, conjugate gaze palsy, or rectus palsy. Then ataxia, where the gait and stance is a problem. Most common cause of the dementia is Alzheimer's disease, and the vascular multiple infarct is mainly in the old people. Combined upper and lower motor neuron disorder. So you can see like just a quick read for you. In upper one, it's increase, and then in lower one, it's just decrease. Okay. Rigidity and then stiffness with unilateral resting tremors and the masked faces is basically Parkinson disease. So in Parkinson disease, knowing what are the tests that we have to do, Parkinson disease, the brain disorder for shaking, stiffness, difficulty with walking, balance, and coordination. Parkinson syndrome, symptoms usually begin gradually and get worse and over time. As the disease progresses, may have a difficulty walking. So what do we do is levodopa and carbidopa. So just to see what are the things that can be affected. So starting from head to toe, mental behavior, coming to sense of smell, then sweating, gastrointestinal. Why? Because they can ask you what are the associated symptoms. It's very like common. They're asking about the main disease and asking about their associated diseases. So treatment we already discussed. So the Guillain-Barré syndrome, rigidity and the stiffness that progresses to the coriform movements, accompanied by the moodiness and altered behavior. It's Huntington disease and it's an autosomal dominant. Very important, this autosomal dominant part. They do ask MCQs, which one is autosomal dominant and which one is autosomal recessive. So please go and see what are those ones. 6-year-old girl presents with the port wine stain in the V1 distribution as well as the intellectual disability, seizures, and ipsilateral. So it's a Sturge-Weber syndrome. Why? Because of the dermatology point of view, they can give you a picture by asking you all of this one. What is the diagnosis? Usually just the diagnosis. Then you can just read the treatment if you feel like reading this one. So that's how it looks like. Then multiple cafe Ollis spots on the skin. So it could be neurofibromatosis type 1. It is a condition by changes in the skin coloring. So that's how it looks like. And the growth of the tumor along the nerves in the skin, brain, and other parts of the body. The signs and symptoms of this condition vary widely among affected people. So you can see this one, there is Leach nodules. Then the neurofibromatosis lumps on the skin. Then the skin folds, there is freckling, and then cafe Ollis spots. Then this is something that you can read. It's just hyperphagia, hypersexuality, hyperorality, and hyperdocility is basically Kluver-Becky syndrome. Just for reading, that's it. Maybe associated to a symptoms, patient to diagnose myasthenia gravis. So myasthenia gravis symptoms can be given. So just see like how does the presentation of myasthenia gravis is and what's the treatment. It's a surgical removal of thymus and then androphonia. So you just have to read like how I am reading, okay? You don't have to go into very detail of this one. It was mainly to build up your concept, so that's why everything is written here. The 4 basic therapies for the myasthenia, so acetylcholinesterase, which is pyridoxine, usually they ask up to this much level. Then plasma and then IVIG. So you can see how does the myasthenia gravis look like? The drooping of eyelid, weakness in the arms, leg, changes of the voice, swallowing difficulty can be treated with adequate care. Then we already discussed about the Wernicke's one. Then comes the Korsakoff psychosis. So it's a memory problem. So if a patient is presenting with ophthalmoplegia, ataxia, along with like confusion is there, but if a patient is having a memory deficit too, retrograde amnesia or anterograde amnesia, in those cases, now this is Wernicke-Korsakoff. But if they don't talk about amnesia, then it's just Wernicke encephalopathy. So is it the late complication? So that's why they both, you need to know when they come as an MCQ together or how they can come in the separate form. So persistent Wernicke encephalopathy and is basically leading towards a memory deficit and behavior. Korsakoff psychosis occurs in 80% of the untreated patients with the Wernicke encephalopathy. It's a severe alcoholism. So homeless people, alcohol, and all this can trigger. So you can see code RAC, confusion of thalmoplegia, ataxia, thiamine deficiency leading towards the RAC, retrograde, anterograde confabulation, and then Korsakoff psychosis. TIA versus stroke. What are the main differences? TIA is a no neurological deficit beyond 24 hours. So it just stays for a couple of hours. Always ischemic, never hemorrhagic, because hemorrhagic does not resolve. Complete neurological recovery in 24 hours. Then we go for CT scan plane and usually start anticoagulation. Now comes the stroke where there is like a 80% ischemic and then is hemorrhagic. What are the things? That focal neurological deficit with a no neurological deficit. Then diagnosis is CT scan without contrast, doing a first line plane and then plane first and then going for MRI when you don't find anything on CT scan. Then going for the anticoagulation, thrombolytic in the ischemic stroke. Hemorrhagic stroke treatment depends on the site, sign, and neurological. Deficit consult the neurology surgeon after the stabilization and workup. What is the treatment? So it's a time-based treatment. Just remember this one, less than 3 hours from the symptoms in ischemic, rule out the opposite contraindications from the thrombotic, like having a previous headache, trauma, taking any anticoagulant, all of those ones. So give TPA, tissue plasminogen activator. It's not contraindicated than aspirin. Then this is like how much you have to give. This reduces death, and then what, like they can give you a scenario where they can ask you a treatment and what is the benefit of that treatment. So it reduces the death and dependency despite of the small increase in the intracranial hemorrhage. Use of antiplatelet agent does not appear to increase the risk. So always do CT 24-hour post thrombolysis to identify the bleed. If the patient is already on aspirin, then stop aspirin and switch to clopidogrel or add the dipyramidol with the aspirin. So thrombolytic role is controversial between 3 to 44 hours since onset of the stroke, because we are still not sure what is going on. More than 4.4 hours, then you can go for non-thrombotic, only aspirin. Then once the hemorrhagic stroke is excluded, then ischemic stroke is confirmed, then you can go for aspirin comfortably. Then catheter up to 6 hours for the stroke symptoms is associated, since you can see what is TIA and what does the stroke, what are the difference between them, just to see the picture, how does it look like. How to recognize a stroke? So remember the BFAST, balance loss, headache or dizziness, eye blurred vision, facial weakness, arm weakness, speech difficulty, time loss, and then brain loss, call fast. So then it comes like this one, BFAST, balance, eye, face, arms, speech, and time. Investigation of the choice for the suspected stroke is basically CT scan plain, no contrast. CT scan result possibility CT brain, normal or non-hemorrhagic one, treatment with like the ischemic stroke. Then the CT scan, if says the ischemic changes, treat as a ischemic stroke, depends on the time since onset of the symptoms. CT brain is basically short the hemorrhagic treatment as per the site and neurological deficit, take the neurosurgeon opinion right away. Then for your idea, how does the normal CSF look like? Okay. And what are the CSF of the different type of meningitis? So as you can say, in the acute bacterial, acute viral, tuberculosis, fungal, and malignant, don't forget about these two as well, okay? So glucose in the bacterial, as you can see, everything is normal except for the viral, the glucose is normal. So protein in everything, it's high except for the viral one. So you can always keep in your head that viral is always different. Then comes the cells. In the bacteria, obviously, there will be neutrophils. In a viral, there will be mononuclear. In tuberculosis, mononuclears and the neutrophils, but it could be less than 300. Fungal is less than 300 as well. So then comes the malignant, which is usually mononuclear. So they will give you a little bit of idea if it's a malignant one, that patient was having a cancer or whatever is going on. Now he has developed this one. Then vitamin deficiency, the neurological, vitamin B1 can cause Wernicke 1. Vitamin B1 can lead towards the Korsakoff encephalopathy as well as is the complication of Wernicke 1. Vitamin B12 can cause pernicious anemia, and it's very important in NACOS3. They can give you a scenario of pernicious anemia. Folic acid deficiency can lead towards the pernicious anemia as well. So you can see the vitamin D. Then vitamin D can also help with the colon cancer as well. Then what's the disorder? How's the evidence? So just for your reading. Positional vertigo, usually we do cover it in ENT, but since we're doing neurology, let's do it here. It's a common condition that can be caused by both central and peripheral vestibular lesions. So central positional nystagmus is basically static. It's like as the head is at one place and it's having. Then the peripheral is basically transient and more common. Then comes the BPPV. It results from the dislodge or otolith, like any like stone that moved around and then causes the disturbance in the semicircular canals, and it's the most common peripheral vertigo. Recent trauma is the most common cause. What are the treatment essential of the diagnosis is basically transient episode vertigo less than 1 minute, nystagmus, nausea, vomiting with a specific head posture and is corroborated by changes in the position. Then habituation of the vertigo or nystagmus. So treatment is Apley's maneuver, okay? And is effective self-treatment by home exercises can be helpful too. In the Meniere's disease, it's basically in the old people, very common. So the differential diagnosis is important as well because it could be mixed diagnosed with the other one, the labyrinthitis or the acoustic neuroma. So you can see the acoustic neuroma can also lead toward the hearing loss. And then what's the difference between the labyrinthitis? So Meniere's disease is important. It's mostly idiopathic and can be due to any trauma and is associated with the syphilis too. So don't forget about the syphilis. Essential for diagnosis is usually more than 40 years of the age. Then tinnitus, nausea, bilateral hearing loss lasting hours to days and reoccurring over the years may lead towards a permanent hearing loss. Then audiometry is usually checking for the fluctuating hearing loss. And then treatment is avoiding all of this one. This one is important because you as a family physician need to counsel this patient. Salt, caffeine, nicotine, alcohol, use the acetazolamide. Then for the acute cases, can give antihistamine. For the refractory surgical treatment. Then comes the essential tremor, previously known as the benign essential tremor. It is a neurological movement. So it's from the rhythmic tremor of the body part and the head and the limbs. And it's basically autosomal dominant inheritance. As I said, this is important. Patients usually have a family history, as I said, the autosomal dominant part, and history of the alcohol or other tremors going on. So you have to do which one? Finger nose test, diagnosis by clinical features and excluding other diseases. The treatment is beta blockers. Then comes the multiple sclerosis. We already have seen so many cases. This one, it's so the main important is accurate diagnosis or accurate test, which is MRI or the lumbar puncture, as outlined the McDonald diagnostic criteria. Then comes the MRI. MRI is the diagnostic test of the choice, as you can see. For the multiple sclerosis, show multiple asymmetrical and paraventricular white areas. Then CSF can show IgG index is high. So giving IV corticosteroids or plasma exchange. And then the disease modifying medications can be used. Symptomatic therapy is crucial. What? Depending on what are the symptoms. So they can give you a multiple sclerosis case where the patient was having spasticity or urine retention. Based on that, you need to know the treatment. So baclofen for the spasticity, then cholinergics for the urinary retention, anticholinergics for the urine incontinence, carbamazepine or the amitriptyline for the painful paresthesia, and antidepressants for the clinical depression. So you need to know what are the symptomatic treatment. It is more important than knowing its treatment. Then comes Alzheimer's disease, most common cause of the dementia. The causes are unknown. For the patient with a mild to moderate, the present effective medication to slow the disease progressive and then improve symptoms. So in those ones we give for donepezil, rivastigmine, glantamine. So they are very important. They usually do like to ask in NACOSCI and in MCQs as well. Vitamin E may also help slow the progress of dementia. So memantine may help with the severe dementia. Symptomatic and supportive therapies can be given to the patients with a significant neuropsychiatric dysfunction. Then comes the frontotemporal dementia. It's a rare progressive form of dementia characterized by the prominent changes in the social behavior, personality. So you need to know the different types of dementia. It's also written in psychiatry. It's also written in neurology. It's on the sidebar, okay? So frontotemporal dementia, it's rare progressive form dementia. So it's the main thing is social behavior. Like a woman can come to you, be like, my husband is not behaving how he used to behave before, or his behavior recently changed. So in the frontotemporal, the behavior is the main problem along with amnesia. Then personality and aphasia, degeneration and atrophy for the frontal temporal lobes, three form of progressive aphasia. Then treatment is going for the SSRIs or the QTAP. Normal pressure hydrocephalus is a potentially treatable form of dementia. It's mainly the classical triad. Which one is that one? Shuffling gait, then dementia, and then urine retention. So you need to know because they ask you giving this one and then make the diagnosis. They're generally no signs of increased ICP and headaches. So diagnosis is mostly made by clinical features and lumbar puncture as well. So that's why you need to know the classic triad: dementia, shuffling gait, and urine incontinence. Which one can cause urine incontinence? Okay. CT scan and MRI can show the ventricular enlargement. So in this one is doing the decompression, like reducing the CSF volume or putting a ventricular shunts. Then comes the multiple sclerosis. I think we already did this one. And so risk is higher, more northern and white people. So multiple sclerosis is more common in the white people. What are the essential of diagnosis? Disseminated lesions, more than one area of the CNS, and history and physical examination can lead towards the optic neuritis, intranuclear ophthalmoplegia, hemistaxia, hemisensory deficit, hemiparesis. So just give it a quick read. Then MRI is the most sensitive one to do for the multiple sclerosis. CSF is also you can help for the oligoclonal. Why this is important? Because this is important for neck point of view. So you never know, they can ask you a question from here in the QE1 too. Evoke potential involve the visual, auditory, and the brainstem origins. Then the diagnosis in most cases, the history, physical examination, and MRI is more than enough. Then the treatment, acute cases, we go for IV pulse, high dose of steroid. So just knowing steroid might not be enough. They can give you in the MCQs a high dose, low dose, kind of that one. So you need to know high dose steroids. Then giving same, we already discussed the baclofen for the specificity, carbamazepine for the pain, amitriptyline for the depression and fatigue, cholinergic for the urine retention, and anticholinergic for the urine incontinence. For secondary, we go for IV pulse immunosuppression. And for prophylaxis is basically the immunomodulators. Then comes the peripheral neuropathies. So sensory is basically numbness or burning, motor is weakness, autonomic causes the vasomotor, and mononeurotherapy. Mononeuritis is basically vasculitis and interruption of the blood supply. I'm just reading it quickly because these are not that important that you need to know. Polyneurotherapy, usually sensory, motor, everything comes together. So it's basically the stocking or the glove distribution is the most common one. The number one cause is in the diabetes and number two in alcohol. So this one you need to know. Okay. So in diabetes, which one? The polyneuropathy. And even in the alcohol, there is polyneuropathy. Then I think we already discussed this Guillain-Barré syndrome as well. Then comes the ALS. Although some people say that it's not important, but I feel like it's not a harm to do a quick read of this one. Okay. So it's usually unknown and it's eventually progress to the respiratory failure because the myasthenia gravis can be mixed up with this one. So just quickly read about this one. Then we give riluzole. And sportive treatment, patient education is important, and strict prevention for the respiratory infection. Then comes the most important topic, the temporal arteritis, because it can lead toward the blindness. So that's why, and also known as a giant cell arteritis, it's a unilateral. In this one, the diagnosis is high ESR and temporal artery biopsy, although it's a gold standard and most specific one, but in most cases, you might miss out the diagnosis based on the biopsy. So just keep in your mind that biopsy is the gold standard one. So in this one, what's the treatment? Same, we discussed the high dose steroid, not knowing steroid, just high dose steroid. Here I want to highlight one thing. Remember the prednisone. What's the difference between prednisone and prednisolone? So prednisone is mainly given in the adult. Prednisolone is given mainly in the children's. Okay. If untreated, may can cause the blindness. Then comes the tension headache. NSAIDs combined with the caffeine are effective. Then along with the swear, chlorpromazine and metoclopramide can be used in the cases of nausea, vomiting too. TCAs are muscle relaxants can maybe used as a prevention. Prophylaxis is basically avoiding the trigger, reduction, and all of that. So in the cases where there is a headache along with the loss of consciousness, we do order CT scan brain. In altered mental state associated with an expanding epidural hematoma occurs within minutes to hours and classically includes acute loss of consciousness, lucid interval, gradual loss of consciousness with a subdural hematoma. Such changes can occur within days to weeks. So then subarachnoid hemorrhage and then migraine. Then, as I already discussed, the GCS calculation should be very, very important. So individual elements as well as the sum of the scores are important. So in which cases we are going to do the tracheal intubation? I think we already discussed this one in the emergency. Often the one is left out, so don't forget about this one. So little bit extra about GCS. So this is the table. You can find in Toronto notes as well. Then comes the generalized tonic-clonic seizures. The most common cause is sodium hyponatremia after vomiting. Potassium has no role in convulsions, although it can lead towards the arrhythmias. Calcium hypocalcemia can cause the twitchiness and then muscle weakness. Magnesium hypomagnesemia, sugar hypoglycemia can cause, and then hepatic failure. Alcohol, barbiturate, benzodiazepines definitely can cause hypoxia, any CNS infection, any CNS anatomic abnormality leading towards a CT scan. If there's an infection, then LP, lumbar puncture. Indication of the epilepsy treatment is not necessary to begin an anti-epileptic drug for a single seizure because it could be a febrile one or it could be something else. The exceptions in which you should start a single treatment, it is basically presentation in the status epilepticus or with the focal neurological signs. Abnormal EEG or lesion in CT scan, you find a tumor or something, family history of the seizures, in those cases, we do start the treatment. And the choice of the treatment is basically the best treatment of the epilepsy is not clear. A number of medications can be effective. Usually the one that's used for like the first like status epilepticus, then we go for benzodiazepines. And then in the other words, levetiracetam, phenytoin, valproic acid. So these are the ones. You cannot be asked to choose between them based on the efficacy. Levetiracetam has the fewer adverse effects. Alternative treatment is with the gabapentin, topiramate, so we can switch on to those ones. If seizures are not controlled with a single agent, can alter the medication. If multiple medications do not control the seizures, surgical correlation can be done. Alcohol withdrawal seizures are not treated with any kind of anti-epileptic drug. Discontinuation of so for the alcohol withdrawal, there is alcohol programs. So we just refer the patient to alcohol programs, just for your knowledge. Discontinuation of the medication, the standard of the care is to wait until the patients have a seizure free for 2 years. A sleep deprivation EEG is the best way to tell that if there is a possibility of reoccurrence. Sleep deprivation can elicit the abnormal